It's the dawn of May 23, 1940, and high above the skies of France, a Spitfire is taking heavy fire from a German aircraft. Inside the cockpit, squadron leader Francis Drogo White manages to pull free from the chaos, but the damaged Spitfire has no chance of reaching home. Bailing out isn't an option, the risk of injury or capture is too great, and there's an airfield just a short distance away. Even though the rapidly advancing Germans may soon overrun it, he decides his only choice is to land the plane there. The wounded Spitfire shudders beneath him as he banks toward the strip. As the aircraft glides low over the grass, its airspeed drops to a dangerous level, but at roughly 80 miles per hour, he manages to bring her down. The plane rolls to a stop. Breathing hard, White forces open the canopy. He's completely alone, and the realization hits him. He's deep in enemy territory. Grabbing his map, he checks where he is and radios back to his base on England's southern coast. He gives his location as the airfield at Calais Mark. British headquarters responds swiftly, telling him to hold his position while help is being dispatched. Scanning the airfield, he spots a ditch running beside the perimeter fence. It's ideal. He sprints toward it and crouches down in the wet soil. There's nothing left to do now but look skyward and wait. Out over the English Channel, the rescue party is already underway. Leading the way are two Spitfires, piloted by Pilot Officer Alan Deere and his wingman, Pilot Officer Johnny Allen. The two fighters are providing cover for the rescue aircraft, a Miles Master M9 trainer with Flight Lieutenant James Prof. Leathert at the controls and a spare seat reserved for Squadron Leader White. But as they near the airfield, they discover it blanketed beneath a dense layer of low cloud, which could easily conceal enemy fighters lying in wait. Deere decides he needs someone watching above the gray cover and directs his wingman Johnny Allen to climb to 8,000 feet and keep watch for enemy aircraft. With Allen climbing to altitude, Deere and Prof descend toward the airstrip. On the ground, Squadron Leader White watches as Deere's Spitfire tears across the sky and thunders over his position. The fighter sweeps into a broad orbit, keeping a watchful eye over the airfield. Then, White spots the M9 master trainer making its approach toward the runway. He rises from the ditch and waves both arms overhead. Prof brings the aircraft in with a clean landing and taxis past the grounded Spitfire. High above, Deere is still circling the airfield when a voice crackles urgently over the radio. 12 enemy aircraft are closing in. Deere's stomach drops. They're going to have to fight their way out. He instructs Allen to hold altitude and engage the enemy. Prof, however, has no radio in the M9 master, so Deere has no choice but to dive down and try to warn him in person. But Prof doesn't notice him. He continues taxiing along the runway, completely unaware that enemy fighters are bearing down fast. Deere charges toward the M9 master at full speed, trying to place himself between the trainer and the incoming threat. Then, with a jolt of dread, he spots the enemy. A Messerschmitt Bf-109 is tearing through the cloud layer, heading straight for Prof's defenseless aircraft. In the German cockpit, Unteroffizier Heinz Gillert locks onto the unarmed trainer. Calmly lining up his aim, Gillert unleashes a burst from his twin 7.92mm machine guns directly at the M9 master. Rounds tear up the grass on both sides of the plane as the German pilot pulls up and swings away, preparing for another pass on the trainer. But then, tracer rounds flash past his cockpit. Gillert snaps his gaze to the right in disbelief to see a British fighter bearing down on him. In the Spitfire, Deere fires off another quick burst from his 8.303 machine guns. The burst is short and flies high and wide, but it's enough to break off Gillert's attack, forcing him into a hard banking turn to the left. Deere slams his throttle open and hauls back hard on the stick, cutting inside the 109's turning arc. The world narrows to the ring of his gun sight as he inches the German fighter into the crosshairs. Deere's finger rests over the trigger. Then suddenly, his focus is broken by a call on the radio. High above the cloud ceiling, his wingman Johnny Allen is locked in a dogfight against multiple German fighters. Deere's pulse quickens as his friend's desperate cries come through. Every instinct tells him to climb and go to Allen's aid, but below sits Prof's M9, master unarmed and CP completely exposed. That has to take priority. Deer keeps pressing the German plane as the two aircraft leave the airfield behind and streak out over the open sea. Gillert frantically scans around him, knowing he has only moments before the Spitfire lines up its shot. He gets on his radio, calling desperately for backup. Above the cloud cover, two more 109s are locked in combat with Johnny Allen. The two German planes are riding Allen 6, but the British pilot is throwing his aircraft around with skill, evading the incoming fire. The German flight leader strains hard on his controls, fighting to keep Allen's plane in his sights. Over the radio, he can hear Gillert's panicked voice. There's simply no way to break off from this fight. Gillert is on his own. Only one move remains. He yanks the stick back and climbs hard, the G-force is pressing him deep into his seat. Gillert hauls upward, desperately hoping somehow to shake his pursuer. The sky streaks by and his engine screams under the strain as he pushes the 109 to its absolute limit. But it isn't enough. A glance in the mirror tells him the truth. The Spitfire is still locked onto his tail. Worse still, his aircraft is bleeding speed badly. His engine has nothing left to give. In his cockpit, Deer gets the perfect firing solution lined up in his sight. He presses the trigger and unleashes a savage burst of machine gun fire at Gillert's aircraft. The rounds tear into the tail of the 109. All around Gillert, the plane shakes and splinters as it's ripped apart. Trails of white smoke and chunks of fuselage peel away behind him as Deer's rounds punch through the rear section and into the cockpit, and into his body. Gillert's hands drop from the controls, lifeless, but even without its pilot, the 109 continues climbing, and Deer keeps firing until the aircraft is swallowed in gray and black smoke. Then, it stalls. For a brief instant, it hangs suspended in the air. The plane rolls onto its back and plunges straight down toward the sea. Deer watches as it corkscrews downward and disappears beneath the waves. He has just become the first Spitfire pilot to bring down a Bf-109. But there's no time to enjoy the moment. Deer knows he must rejoin his wingman Johnny Allen, who is still fighting off two enemy aircraft. All he gets is static. With no answer from Allen, he turns back toward the airfield to check on White and Prof. They're both still crouched in the ditch, and the M9 appears undamaged, but they're nowhere near safe. German ground forces are moving in, and the threat of more Bf-109s still looms. Deer finds no trace of Allen below the cloud layer, so he opens the throttle and climbs hard, punching through the gray murk in search of his friend. The sky appears empty. No matter how many times he calls on the radio, only silence answers. The rescue mission must come first, so he pushes the stick forward and angles back down through the cloud when two 109s burst from the haze and the planes tear past each other at blistering speed. Deer watches the two German aircraft begin banking around for a run at him. He throws the Spitfire into a tight turn and takes them on alone. The German pilots are caught off guard as the Spitfire closes on them with stunning speed, turning at what seems an impossible rate. Pulling in behind the first enemy plane, Deer lines up his shot and lets loose with everything he has. Tracer rounds hammer into the German aircraft and black smoke begins streaming from it, but Deer holds the trigger down as panels and fragments are hurled back through the slipstream. The pilot loses control and the 109 slams into the ground below. Far below in the ditch, Prof and White watch the 109 erupt in a fireball, one down, one remaining. Deer has burned through a lot of ammunition, but looking ahead, he sees the surviving 109 has used the fight to build distance. He pushes the throttle wide and drives forward in pursuit. The German pilot throws his aircraft into a -G nosedive, a classic move to shake a Spitfire. Deer knows he can't follow it directly. Unlike the Bf-109's fuel injection system, the Spitfire's Merlin 3 engine will be starved of fuel in a dive and cut out. So Deer's answer is to roll the aircraft inverted and dive that way. It costs him precious seconds, but the engine stays alive. Ahead of him, the 109 pilot pulls cleanly out of the dive and rockets forward with a simple pull of his stick. By the time Deer levels out, his enemy has opened a significant gap. The two planes skim low over the treetops as the 109 pulls further ahead. Deer must act immediately to close the distance. He drives the throttle as far forward as it will go, snapping past the safety gate and unlocking the emergency engine boost. The engine surges, and the Spitfire leaps forward. Using the boost places enormous stress on the engine, but he needs every last fraction of power. The German pilot glances in his mirror and sees the Spitfire gaining ground, growing steadily larger behind him. He throws his aircraft into a hard turn to starboard, desperately trying to shake Deer off his tail. But Deer refuses to let his target go. The 109 jinks left and right, flashing across the gun sight. Deer holds his nerve and waits. At last, the 109 settles squarely in the middle of his crosshairs, and he squeezes the trigger. Nothing happens. He curses quietly as the realization sets in. He's completely out of ammunition. So Deer opts for a high-stakes bluff. He stays glued to the 109's tail, mimicking his every move as though preparing to fire. It's a gamble, but it pays off. The 109 twists left and right, evading a stream of rounds that never arrives. Eventually, though, the German works it out. The Spitfire has gone silent. He begins pulling into a steep banking turn. Dread creeps into Deer's chest. If the 109 lines up for an attack, he has absolutely no defense. But the German doesn't pull the trigger. Instead, he rolls out and runs hard for friendly lines. Back at the airfield, Prof and White climb out of the ditch, having watched the last BF 109 disappear into the distance. They sprint to the M9 master and get ready to leave. Prof fires up the engine and runs through the controls. Time to go. Within minutes, they're rolling down the runway and climbing toward the safety of England. When Deer swings back to check on his friends, only White's abandoned Spitfire remains on the ground. His friends are safely away. He makes one final attempt to raise his wingman Johnny Allen on the radio. He calls one more time. A familiar voice answers. It's Allen. He tells Deer he managed to bring down one of the Germans, but has taken serious damage and needs to get home. The plane isn't handling well. Worried about his friend attempting to cross the channel in a crippled Spitfire, Deer pushes the throttle and races to find him. At last, he catches sight of the struggling Spitfire and pulls up beside it. Deer lets himself breathe again, a quiet smile of relief crossing his face. The aircraft is clearly battered, but she looks like she can make it. Finally back together, the two pilots set course across the English Channel, where they catch up with the slower M9 master carrying Prof and White. Thanks to the courage and skill of these three pilots, the rescue mission was an unqualified success, and it marked the first time in history that a Spitfire had shot down a Bf 109. If you enjoy watching fearless pilots locked in breathtaking aerial duels, you'll love the extraordinary battle between Me-163s and P-51s.